So it's really great to see so many people here for the strategic case study session. We're really glad to have Tom Berry here, who got the highest mark in the strategic case study last year. And he's going to be talking us through a few of his tips and tricks for getting through the case study. Just a bit of background. So I'm Susanna. I'm the Vice President of the CIPFA Student Network. And Amy and I have been coordinating this session. But yeah, very excited to have Tom here. And I think with that, we're best to get going. So thank you, Tom.
Hi, everyone. I think you've got the slides. I just give a brief introduction myself. I'm currently an accountant at Ealing Council in their resources and strategy and change teams. My CIPFA journey actually started at Hammersmith and Fulham Council in September 2020. So I sat my case study last December. I got the results in January, and felt quite lucky, to be honest, to get the highest grade. But hopefully I can share some tips and tricks to help you there. I think I'll start by saying that I wasn't actually always a top student in terms of the scores. I don't know if I get some of these in the old language for them, but my first set of exams actually failed my financial accounting, so off the bat wasn't really the best there. I then failed my PSFR as well once. I failed my FM 2 times, and I also failed my tax 2 times. So I hope that that can show that even if perhaps in the early exams you may have struggled, case studies are slightly different beast. And to be honest, if you're at this point already, you probably are some of the more committed and better students. So you should take faith and confidence in that. But in terms of sort of specific tips and tricks for this, I think I'll first point out that, as I said, it is possibly your final exam. So it really is worth just that final push in order to get everything passed and finally be done with exams after the 3.5 year journey. The second one I will give is to remember to do your tech test. I did in mine have a slight dropout, and obviously without that tech test, it's still the same way that I was doing it. You need to have that to make sure that if anything does go wrong, you have a case to present back. In terms of the actual paper itself, the approach to it, you'll need to analyze the sort of breakdown of marks. And when I was doing it, it was about 15% numerical. So obviously that meant that you needed to be aware of your theories perhaps more strongly than in the other more financial accounting exams. And sorry, I just see there's been a question about the score I got was 93% in my case study exam, which I was surprised at. Yeah, hopefully, like I said, by revising, you'll be able to get scores close to that. But anyway, I'll also suggest that you do all of the mocks in your classes in the time period set. Now, I know for perfectionists it can be frustrating to possibly not finish in the time frame that is set. But to be honest, the main sort of use I had for these was actually working out my rough timings for questions that involved reading time and processing time for myself, and a sense of how long I should spend per mark in terms of minutes. So I think for me, it worked out something like just over 1.5 minutes per mark. But for yourselves, in terms of reading times and other factors, it might change. And then once you've done those, I think it's four or five mocks, you feel fairly confident that you know the rhythm of the paper. You feel fairly confident you've covered a wide breadth of examples that will highlight any weak areas that you may have. And I think that really helps to then set up your revision closer to the time. For me, this took on probably 3 different key modes. The first one is when the advanced material is released, to make sure that you look at it, do at least one read through, just to understand it, and then a second read through with a highlighter or a Word or Google Sheets document. And we did this in my cohort by doing a big shared document between about 20 or 30 of us, where everyone could put their ideas. And I think for me, the most useful thing was finding common themes. because you can get a little bit lost down avenues. But when people are putting the same sort of things up, you know that's a major theme that everyone is picking up on. The second top sort of pre-exam day tip I had was to go to what was organised as a lecturer's session. So the lecturers were going through the same process that you yourself will do as a student, but they'll then compare between the 4 or 5 or however many of them it is, and they'll give their opinion of what's likely to come up, what some of the key points are. And some of them will be really obvious sort of things, but it's always worth putting those obvious marks in because they're sort of the low-hanging fruit. And I think sometimes you can forget that just because it seems obvious to you doesn't mean that it's not worth a mark. So their lecturers are really good at emphasizing all those sort of points and going through in that session. And then as the few days before the exam came up, I personally like to take maybe 3 or 4 days of leave, which I appreciate is difficult in terms of everyone's, your balance throughout the year and perhaps other exams you may have taken it for. But for me personally, I like to switch into the kind of exam mode where I knew I wasn't going to be getting emails and work tasks, and sort of really try and insulate myself into that exam mode, along with probably texting and sharing sheets with my fellow students so that we could sort of prepare things. And I actually made a large list of mnemonics and lists on a big whiteboard, and I would keep it in the front room and constantly walk by it, test myself on it, get my housemates to test myself on it. And then that way I could sort of make sure that I had these lists ready to go as jumping off points, as well as making perhaps mind maps and things of that sort. I think the other thing is to emphasize that those are things that work for me. You will have all done the other 11 exams, so you will know for yourselves the kind of techniques that work. And I think you have to sort of believe that you're in the position to be sitting this exam for a reason and having done those. And you have to know the techniques that have worked for you. And I think just keep the faith that actually, if it's worked previously, more than likely it's going to work again. And I think the other thing I would say is, in terms of, I've had some questions about wider reading and being aware of the sort of general public sector environment. I used to keep all of my CIPFA magazines and did do a session, did a whole day with a friend of going through them, looking for examples. But on top of that, I also would just sort of, to be honest, Google some things. So I remember doing one on police procurement of a siren system, looking at change and management, and just having that as sort of a 1 or 2 line example to really emphasize your own points. Because the key thing with the case study exam is to read the purpose of the exam, which is normally it would say headlines such as "you are a senior accountant" or "you are an auditor" or whatever position it gives you, and to act as that person as a full-time role. So you're there to analyze the information and then present a meaningful opinion and sort of sets of advice to those who might not be in financial positions. And I think you want to not be losing sight of that in your writing style and in your analysis of the paper. I think in terms of sort of my tips and things that first came to mind, those are the main ones. So I don't know, Amy, I'm just gonna have a read through the chat. If there's anything that you want to prompt or add, please let me know.
So we've had a question through on studying for areas that weren't so obviously linked to the case study. So I think that's around the kind of general study areas.
Mm-hmm. In terms of not obviously linked, there should be, in most cases, either a hint towards it, or over the course of the mocks that you've done, you will have been exposed to the vast majority of things that are likely to come up. I think one thing that we discussed as a class was that we didn't want to sort of go down any rabbit holes with things. I think in that case, I would really advise using your lecturers. I would personally have an opinion that I was never scared to sound like the most stupid person in the room. So if I wasn't sure of anything, I would just ask straight away, either on the forums or if you're a bit shy to use the forums, also I've done it directly through email. I think always if you're unsure of things or if you want to get an opinion, ask your peers and your colleagues either in a WhatsApp to start with, or if it's a sort of detailed question, don't be scared of asking your lecturers. They're there to help you. They're there to get you to pass these exams. No one wants to be resitting exams. They don't want you to be resitting them. They want people to have good experiences. Um, so I think it's a case of thinking, it's good to have those thoughts of where could this advanced material be jumping off to, but I think you have to take a second and think about the time you have building up to the exam. How much of my time is it worth exploring this avenue, and how likely is it actually that this will come up? Because in reality, if it's something that you think might possibly come up, but it's not 100% clear, the likelihood is it's only going to be a few marks, so it might not be worth getting sort of really into a hole about it. But certainly, I think the main thing is to use your colleagues and your lecturers as a good sounding board.
Brilliant. Thanks, Tom. We have a question on the format or breakdown of the exam, which I appreciate it might have changed slightly, but maybe if you have just talk through how it was for you and how you revised.
From memory, it was all very similar to the mocks I had done. Nothing had really changed too substantially, and I've been very prepared in my classes for how the exam was going to look. As you said, I'm not obviously sitting the current syllabus, but look, my one, there was about, I think, as I said, maybe 15% was numerical. That consisted of one sort of offshoot question where I had to do NPV. It's not to say that that's what's going to come up in your guys' exams, but that was my one, and I'd gone through my been FM or PSFR book, and I sort of looked at my NPV tables. I think, to be honest, I remember calculating it and it being just seeming woefully wrong. But the opinion I then gave was based off of that table, because that's what would be, the evidence backing up my opinion. So I think that the setup of the paper, you'll have quite a lot of writing and typing, which is why, as I said earlier, I would emphasize, looking at your mocks and trying to think, okay, how much time do I have per point? When should be the point where I'm sort of just typing for the sake of typing and need to move on? I would always make sure with the paper that I would take at least 10 minutes, maybe 15, to have read it and skimmed it cover to cover. The appendix bits where you get those emails from your colleagues, that would really inform the main bulk of things, because that's where the angles are going to come from. Looking at things like ethics is always going to come up, I feel, or is at least easy marks. Things like governance structures and those sorts of things. You want to always be reading and thinking with a purpose. Why is this being mentioned? And I think perhaps in terms of the structure of the paper, that will help inform, if you get to the end and you not mention something that you thought, oh, well, that email would imply that there's like an ethics angle or things like that, then you can do a quick skim back and make sure you've got those points in there.
Amazing, thank you. I think an overarching sort of concern from people is about the kind of timekeeping. So there's a question around allocating time to these bigger areas and then the more detailed areas while avoiding rabbit holes. It's got a secondary question, which is, was there anything in the exam that took you massively by surprise, or had you sort of got the gist by then?
Well, when I would do a paper, I would read it all through, and then I would look at how much time I had left, and I would do a little plan, because I have a history background, so I was very used to doing sort of essay plans. So for example, I would be like, question, whatever it was, question one, parts A, B, C, D. I would have, okay, I started the exam at 10 o'clock. I've read it through for 10 minutes. Okay, my start time is 10 past 10. And this paper this question is worth, I don't know, 10 marks. And for me, it would be like, a minute and a half per mark. So then it would be 10:10 to 10:25, and I'm spending on this question. And if I went sort of a minute over, I'd then be like, okay, I really have to start moving on now to the next question. And I wouldn't necessarily do it in chronological order. I think different lecturers will have different opinions on this, but I'd always try and start with maybe a strong answer that I could really immediately. I just knew what the points were. A question just that I really understood, so that I know I had my sort of some strong marks in the bank. The numerical ones, typically our lecturers would say it's quite easy to get caught going down that rabbit hole. So I'm not saying to leave those to the end, because for some people they're very strong at them, but certainly my weakness was in the numerical, so I would leave them till later, and sort of just, unless of course it's a follow-on question, and you can't give an advice unless you calculated the MPV, for example. But I would try and make sure that my strong questions would be answered within their blocks. So I wouldn't, I'd do question one, A, B, C, or one, D, B, whatever. But I would do sort of all question one, and then I'd do all of question two, and then maybe all of question four, all of question three. Now, however the paper's set up, you should by this point know your own strengths, and I think be okay with that. And you'll know when you read the questions, okay, I'm going to be good at that question. Maybe I'll start with that one, because I can get some really good marks there.
Yeah, fantastic. I think that's always a good way to sort of approach an exam like this, that kind of written style, to start with your strengths and know what your strengths are. There's quite a specific answer, a question in the chat about answering format. So there's differing advice from tutors on answer presentation. Some tutors suggest to use bullet points, others say to avoid them. So the question is, as long as you answer the question, would you say that bullet points are adequate or sort of a good tool?
I think because of my history background, I tended to be quite okay writing prose, but within that prose, they're almost bullet point like. You don't want these long rambling sentences. It would often be, if it's based on either me pulling out a figure from the material, you might, I don't know what your guys is going to be, but you might make a point of, the organization is losing money here, and then you might put X amount, the NPV, or the pricing that could be introduced could raise this amount, and they're more to emphasize points. I think my fear with bullet points is it can get quite easy just to sort of keep listing and listing stuff, and just think, oh, I put a bullet point and therefore that's guaranteed a mark. The emphasis should be that any point you make is to provide value. I found that easier with prose because I found it more how I would actually write a paper, in your day-to-day work job. But yeah, I think if the main thing is if the lecturer is giving the advice, normally that they're going to be giving that for a reason, and perhaps it's a case of if you do I'm assuming that there's going to be a lecturer session, or you can ask on the forum. It just ask why. Why is it your opinion that it's better to do a bullet point, or why is it better to do prose? And I think you'll just follow the logic that works for you really, and that you understand. And perhaps look at your mocks. If you've done the mocks, what format did you use? What point scores did you get? Because they're marked often fairly closely to how a paper will be marked. If not, sometimes I think more harshly, just to try and get people to revise more. But yeah, I just always think, why am I doing the way that I'm doing it? Is it clear to an examiner that I'm saying, yep, this is the point, this is where I want my mark, thank you very much, Mr. and Mrs. Examiner, and go from there.
Brilliant. Thanks, Tom. That's really helpful. There's a question. There's a question in the chat which I think possibly slightly misphrased, but in terms of splitting things out between, you have your case study and you have your advanced materials, but you get the exam day materials too. So I suppose, do you have any sort of reflections on seeing the exam day materials and how that and how you approach that?
As in on the day, like when I
Yeah.
open the paper. I think that I went into the exam knowing that I had read the advanced materials and pulled out the key points. And I think as long as you're going in with that knowledge that you've had these discussions, you've revised and prepared, that you sort of have a rough idea of what could come up. I think, probably about 60 to 70% as a rough rule of thumb, you could guess quite fairly accurately, even if not the wording, but the rough idea of what's going to come up in the exam. You could get that from the advanced material. Um, Obviously an exam is stressful. I think that the length of this exam can be quite intimidating, as well as the pressure of it being almost your last one. Um, but as I think I said in my intro, you have to believe that you're at this point now because you've passed enough exams before. You've had this getting the exam material where you've not had advanced material. You've been through it. You can do this because you've managed to before look at a paper, extract the key information, especially on the more wordy ones, which I think BCM, I think it is for you guys, or that sort of spine of the CIPFA side. There's a lot of content. And I think you just have to think that you've read the advanced material, you've double checked on areas you were slightly patchy on, and you sort of feel prepared to tackle the exam. And I think because of the time pressure of it, with the amount that there is, if you do sort of get halfway through an answer and think, oh, maybe I'm not so sure here, you kind of just have to plow through and not get too bogged down in it, because as with all these things, you only need, for me it was 50%. I'm presuming it's still the same mark. 50% is very doable in a paper like this, where um, it's a lot of written answers that you can quickly put points in. You don't have to work through all these long calculation tables. You're not having to necessarily do like a MERS or a balance sheet and make it balance. Those are long and quite difficult if you are sort of going down the wrong path. With this exam, if you're on a question and you can think of a few points, you can quite easily get those points and just stay calm and get back into that rhythm. As I said earlier, for me, that rhythm came from planning the time I allocated to answers. And I think if you have that plan and your revision backing and the advanced paper backing, I don't think anything on the exam day should scare you too much, to be honest.
Amazing, thank you. Yeah. So we had another question. So going back to time management, which I know has been you've covered a bit already, but what would be your overarching line on time management? And then there's a secondary bit in there about picking out key points and incorporating them into answers. So I suppose just that referring back to the case study. So maybe your sort of one-liner on time management and then talking about those picking out key points.
I think the key would be in I think in your mocks and the build up to embrace that time pressure. You need to practice feeling pressured, and perhaps if you maybe in your mocks you wanted to open book, which I know some people do, and that's one way of doing it. But in your other revision, try and introduce some of that pressure to yourself so it's not new. And I think I'll go back to just having a plan for the exam and being confident in it. My plan, as I said, was to look at my time per marks that I'd worked out and know that I was going to read the paper for 10 minutes without question, to sort of get a full cover of it, and then plan my times from there. and keep myself honest with them. That I think those are my main ones, is to make sure you've at some point exposed yourself to pressure. I think partly I was quite bad at my early exams because if I didn't really like something or want to do it, I was quite good at finding excuses not to do it. So, but you're only going to do yourself a disservice, as I found out, to my time and to my wallet. So you need to expose yourself to that time pressure and to those uncomfortable questions that you know you're going to hate doing in the build up, but you'll be much more grateful for it, especially if it does come up in the exam and you just smash your way through it.
Yeah, amazing. That's definitely one of the hardest things to do, is just to admit that you can't do something and then make yourself do all the questions on the bit that you don't like when you've got the bit you can do sitting there in the background. That tempting question. I know that one strategy for that is that people is you sort of leave the question you can do as a reward for having done some of the horrible ones. Um, so yeah, going back to this picking out, I'm afraid I'm going to have to confess there's an acronym here, EDM, that I don't recognise, but picking out key points in EDM and incorporating those into the answers. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I'm guessing it's exam day material. I think that would be, um, I guess anyone who's had a humanities or an art background, I think that it comes more naturally to read stuff and to be able to pull things out. But you'll do this in your day to day without realizing, of being in a meeting and listening to what people say and realizing that the key things they want. I think for me it was those, the spread of, it would be things like emails or local news reports that they add into the paper. That would be quite informative of the sort of themes that they were looking for. So I'd make sure I'd be reading those, and have them in mind for the questions. And sometimes I would, in fact, I would read the questions and then make little scribbles on bits of scrap that, if there's a question on ethics and there's an email where it's, someone seems to know the governor personally and is getting business through it, immediately that that's going to come into that question. So I think, as you're reading, if you're just making little scribbles, even if it only makes sense to you, because you're the one that's going to see it, um, it's just thinking, what's the angle here? What's the question looking for? What's the evidence supposed to be presenting? Because this paper, they don't put it together by accident. Each of these things that they're hoping that you're going to pick up on, an angle that they're going after. So I think it's just trying to keep in your mind's eye as a filter. Either you have the question in mind when you're reading the evidence, or have the evidence in mind when you're reading the question. That's the key aspect, really.
Fantastic, thank you. There's sort of a carry-on question here. So, in thinking about your own approach to exams, would you choose to read the exam day material and then move on to the questions, or would you be doing sort of questions first, then exam, then read the material that you've got? What would be your preference there,
Um,
and why?
I I think most likely I would have read the questions briefly. I would probably, as I said, because the numerical aspect's smaller, anyone that was clearly a numerical one, I would sort of be skimming it and think, okay, I'll be coming back to that, but it's not my main focus right now. Um, when I say, I don't mean read it like a novel. You're skimming the questions, looking for sort of key buzzwords and phrases that it's going to imply what they're after. Those phrases. I always say ethics always came up in ours, or if it's like some of the theories of organizations or of pricing. If you see those words, you're going to have that sort of, all of your notes and knowledge is going to sort of come to the forefront. And then you'll sort of scan through the exam day materials. You'll be thinking back to the advanced materials, and just making sort of lots of little points, I would say. You might put question one, A, B, C, D, and then if you get to question 1A and it said, I don't know, something about pricing and appendix, B has something like a whole list of after schools clubs prices and proposals. You're going to sort of quite quickly match those together. And it's just sort of that knowing that you'll flick through stuff and where it will be. So I hope that's a helpful answer. I know it's hard without the paper in front of me and in front of you, but yeah, it's always just having that sort of trying to draw those links in your mind and on a bit of paper.
Would you another question's come through. Were there questions on the exam that didn't directly link to the exam day material, or weren't sort of ones that were apparent, or ones that you had expected, or only that you opened the exam and you went, oh my gosh, what?
So any time I've sat an exam, I have a colleague that I started all the CIPFA exams with and did all the way through, and I would always phone her afterwards. And we've had, most of the time in the early exams, we would say, the same stuff, this one was looking for this. With this exam, I do remember us phoning each other and we had, oh, I thought this theory worked and this theory worked. And we had different stuff, but I think the main thing is as long as you can make it relevant. That's the beauty of the two strategic modules, case study and the one before, is that if you can give clear evidence as to why it links, obviously not being ridiculous here, but most of the time you can make a good case for these things and your interpretation of the material. I think if you've looked at the exam mark schemes, you'll see that they've got lists and lists and lists of examples and points. So, as long as yours is mainly relevant, the likelihood is that they're aware of it and it is relevant. And the key is to explain the point convincingly and to just be really clear why you brought it up and how it feeds into any assessment that you're making. If that's answered that question.
Brilliant, thanks, Tom. I actually have a question, which is, so we're thinking 3.5 weeks from now, quite a lot of people in this call are going to be sitting down and starting their paper. The last 24 hours before the exam, what's your modus operandi? What are you thinking doing? And how did you feel, I suppose?
So I had a lot of research, so I'd used quite a lot of my leave anyway. So I think I'd only taken maybe 3 or 4 days compared to the normal week and a bit I take. I got to the 24 hours before, coming to the evening before, and I felt a kind of a sense of calm because I had made all these lists. I had followed the lecturer's advice. I had done all of the mocks. And as I was doing the mocks, they'd got progressively better by practice. And I had these big lists that I was learning, and I'd gone through it, and knowing I knew all of it, I'd probably gone through that 3 or 4 more times. And I was just trying to, at that point, make sure I had a decent night's sleep, and I knew I'd done my tech test, so that was covered as well. I asked my housemates if they could be quiet or if they could work in the office so that I could, not have any distractions and the Wi-Fi wasn't going to suffer. So I think I just tried to do everything that I could for me to feel comfortable, because it's coming. You know you're going to have to sit this thing, but you'll also have known from all your other exams what it is that gets you in the kind of groove for it. Whether that's you have a tradition and a suspicion of a certain meal or whatever, to try and get a good night's sleep. And I think just at that point, have faith that what you've done and the build-up is going to work and be worth it. You'll know in yourself if you've done enough. You can only try and fool other people. You can't fool yourself that you've done the level that you want to. And I think just be aware that whatever result you get on the other side is all down to how you've used the help of others and how you've prepared yourself. There's at the end of it all, there's a mark there, and you can't really argue with the result of it if you've not put in the work. Which I certainly hadn't done in some of my other exams, and I've made endless excuses for. But by this point, I was determined that this was going to be the last exam, the CIPFA that I was going to sit. So I think the main thing is to just be in a position in those last 24 hours where you're just topping up knowledge, and you're actually able to be calm and rested for the exam.
Amazing. So for anyone suddenly feeling very stressed, just remember 3.5 weeks remaining is actually quite a long time to that you've got to consolidate your knowledge and get to that calm position that Tom's mentioning at 24 hours before. So a question that came in was about, so after you sat the exam, you know, you've got it's the last exam of CIPFA, you had a month to go to results. How did you find that period of time?
I've had I've had exams where I've come out and thought I smashed it and did terribly. I've had exams where I've come out and thought I did terribly and passed. Um, I think this one I felt, because my score had improved on the previous strategic one. I felt I was in a more area I was familiar with, but I was also moving jobs at this time, which I really would not advise doing. So that was adding a different layer of stress, and I had the threat of having to pay all of my fees ever back if I failed it. So as long as you've not got that, you're probably in a slightly more calm position than me. But that period between your finishing exams and getting the results, it's not nice for anyone. But you can take solace in the fact that, what's there, 90 odd people on this call, at least 90 other people are feeling exactly the same, and you've got your friends and family to celebrate with, however you'd like to do that. I kept all my books ready in case I had to resit, and then as soon as I got my results, I put them in boxes, ready to put, far under the bed and the back of the wardrobe. So I think you just have to, try and enjoy, firstly, the aspect of getting to that exam and passing it. I think I haven't looked at what the pass rates are, but I sense that they're probably higher for this exam than for many others. Your lecturers have tried to repay you the best. If you're here sort of preaching to the converted that you've done all the other exams, you're still going, so why not this one? But you do have to try and enjoy that first feeling of possibly not having to sit another exam, and then just believing you'll get that relief in January when you do pass it. And if you don't, it's not the end of the world. It will feel like it, sure, a little bit. I thought of quitting a couple of times. I think on one of my exams I got 49.3%, and that was a slightly rough one to take. But you just have to pick yourself back up, and then it's only going to be another 3 or 6 months. And if you're thinking financially, your value is going to really go up once you pass this. So again, put in that last little shift. And I can't tell you how quickly the last year has gone not having exams. So just if nothing else, just focus on that feeling and wanting to shut that paper and shut the online window for the last time.
Yeah, can't I'm a few exams away, but I cannot wait for that feeling.
Yeah.
So we've got a few people in the call who are, not sitting the case study this exam session, but are looking forward to when they will be, or looking forward strictly in the sort of time sense, I think. But one of the questions was, would you recommend going to face-to-face classes above doing them online? So there's the option to do it in March as an online exam, an online study, but would you recommend waiting and doing that, getting that face-to-face interaction?
I'm going to have to speak personally here because everyone's going to be different. For me personally, absolutely face to face was worth it. When I joined CIPFA, it was in the middle of COVID and it was all online, and I really struggled with that. I would say at the start, you obviously want to be keen and really enthusiastic. I think we're all aware that some of this material can be quite dry and hard to pay attention to. But I actually found that for me being in the face-to-face class, I was able to just put my hand up, in the middle of someone talking, and waiting for them to, check if I understood, much more easily than online. Also, I think I met a lot of people that I'm still, friends with today. So in terms of networking, that's helpful. But just having people to text and ask things about questions and being made to sit in an exam, You do your session from 1 till 4:30 doing the mock papers, and I think I would have maybe not done them quite as strictly if I was at home, but again, that's probably on me rather than anyone. But in saying that, I've done online classes as well, and actually I saw someone at the CIPFA conference who knew me as the person that was always asking questions there as well. So you can do it, and I appreciate for some people, if they've got childcare things or just other commitments, it's preferable to do it online. I'm just going to go back to saying what I said before, which is that at this point in your tip for journeys, you probably know deep down if you do it online, if you're actually going to do it properly and pay attention, or if you perhaps need that face-to-face environment. Um, and I can't answer that question for you. You'll have to know that, and know how you respond to it. But from purely personal perspective, I would say that in person's better. But that's just based on myself, I think.
Great, thank you, Tom. This is probably a point to mention that in the main chat there is a link to our WhatsApp group. So if you're someone who studies online but would like to meet other people doing the strategic case study, we have WhatsApp group. We have a WhatsApp community which has a dedicated strategic case study group where people can post their thoughts, and if you want to get any input from anyone else or would like to set up some study sessions, anything like that, the WhatsApp group is there. If you have any issues with the links or anything like that, do just let me know. We're very, very happy to help. But the WhatsApp community has been a great thing for getting people to meet other students. So just a little plug from me there. And we're coming to the end of our questions. So I suppose coming back to this, we've got, yeah, I'm going to say it again, that we've got about 3.5 weeks left till the exams. If this was a year ago and this was you, what would those 3.5 weeks be looking like for you?
Um, I would have read the advanced material, that's for sure. Read it probably 2 or 3 times. I would have discussed it with both immediate sort of friends and things. So if you go to these sessions with someone from your own organisation, that's a great first start. Then further wider classmates, and it'd just be sort of ticking in my head. I think of what any time an idea came into my head, thinking about the advanced material, I'd write it down somewhere and use that as a jumping off point. I would locate my textbooks that have some of the detailed explanations of numerical points, and some of them that have detailed theories. So, for example, mine was SPD. I don't know what it's called for you guys. I'm sorry, SPD and BCM, and all of the really wordy ones. I would make sure I have the theories somewhere and be making mnemonics, lists, and just sort of learning those, constantly testing myself on them. I think I would maybe look through my mocks to see if areas that I'm weaker on, and just not being afraid to reach out to your peers, to lecturers, and to anyone you think will be helpful. And it's the last push. You really want to leave it all there. Maybe don't go to that party or miss that game. Which could feel like a long old sacrifice after doing it for 3 odd years, 3.5 years. But you don't want to be resitting again if you can help it. Really, you just want this all done and out the way and on to the next phases of your life. Really.
Great. So you've mentioned quite a few times you're very happy to be done with exams. There's just one more question that's come through, and then I'm going to close the Q&A, which is, so you mentioned you've moved councils and you're sort of moving on to next steps. Would one of those next steps be the ICAW qualification, or do you feel kind of happy with where you are now?
I have been keen to do it. I think there was supposed to be a class run this summer, which I think got cancelled. I moved in January and I had a bit more responsibility and a little adjusting period. But I think for me, whilst you're in that kind of exam mode and you've got other people who might want to do it, it's probably worth it. The last time I looked at it, I think it is about 2.5K. And if you see yourself being in the public sector forever, then perhaps it's not worth it. Um, I think for me at this point in our careers, it's probably worth having that option, and I think it makes you a very appealing candidate. Certainly, over the number of people I've met from Hammersmith to Ealing, and just around in general in CIPFA and accounting, they say if you have any slight vague interest in even thinking about doing these things, you should do it, because as you get more senior, your time becomes more limited. You don't get study leave as a guarantee. You don't necessarily, you can't take time off when you might want to. I would like to do it. I just need to sit down and actually organise myself doing it. I would probably advise looking at it if you're even vaguely interested, because the worst you can do is email ICAW, email CIPFA, and get to the point of think actually not now. Um, but I would certainly think about doing it. When I joined, this wasn't available, and it had been debated about being made available for a long time. So it's still very new, but you don't know how long it's going to last, and you get access to a lot more materials. And also, even if you're looking at just jobs, a lot of them might not be listed because it might be a private company, or they might specify different accounting, and you just got two things there, and it's only one more exam. Um, I kind of think it's pretty worth looking at.
Yeah, there's never any harm in having an extra string to your bow. Um, so, well, thank you so much, Tom, for all of some very, very helpful tips there, which I'm sure will have given a lot of people basics, effectively their study plan until December, the first week of December. And for everyone else who has attended, thank you so much for attending. And I hope this has been useful, even if you're not in the December study session. So just to let everyone know, this is something that we run typically for the December and then the June exam seasons. So there will be another one next summer, possibly with Tom again. We haven't asked you yet, Tom, but but very just really, really helpful. So I think some of the key points there were, use your time wisely in the next 3 weeks. Talk to people, talk to your lecturers. Believe in yourself. This is the final push, and you can definitely get there. But make sure that you're looking at those kind of difficult areas, those parts of revision you're definitely putting off. Don't put them off for much longer, and you will get there. We're all in the same boat. We're all CIPFA students who are really rooting for each other to get to the end of this qualification. So another huge thank you to Tom. Big thank you to Amy as well for helping to set this up. Really, really appreciated. And I'm just going to pop these. I'm going to try. Got some emails which have been coming through on the screen. Tom has very, very kindly agreed that we could put his email on there. So if you've got any questions for him specifically, do drop him a line. If you've got any questions that you'd like to direct to us, the CIPFA Student Network, I've popped the president email on there. So anything that you've got a query on about the case study or more generally, do drop us a line. And then if you've got issues more to do with your studies, the student support email is on there too. So lots of branches, very, very up for helping with any questions you might have. So I think all I may say is another really big thank you to Tom for taking the time to talk to everyone today. Really hope this was useful for everyone, and thank you very much.
Good luck, everyone.